basically what I'm going to do is give you kind of a quick rundown of how I got involved in the work that I do as a journalist, and then we'll go into the rest of this program here and put people in different groups and such and take it from there. So my story is an extremely non-traditional way of getting into a career, probably of any kind. And if anything, I think it can provide an example that if you follow your heart, and this might sound cliche, but it's true, that if you really follow your heart and what you feel really strongly pulled to go do, life has a way of kind of unfolding support for you so that you can do that thing, whatever it might be. So whether it's journalism, and you can use my story as just an example of how this could unfold. So whether it's journalism or anything else that you might become interested in and feel like you really need to pursue that thing. So for me, I went to college. I got a degree in speech communications. I had no idea or plans of becoming a journalist at the time. And I got out of college. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew that I wanted to be in the mountains. I knew that it was important for me to climb. So not exactly a well-paid career in mountain climbing, but I moved up to Alaska and started working on Denali, big mountain up there. It's the highest peak in North America. And I was working up there first I climbed it as a client, and then I started working up there as a mountain guide, and then I was working for the Park Service doing rescues. And that's what I was doing when the Iraq War in 2003 broke out. And I felt this very, very strong pull, because at the time I was getting politicized. I really didn't have a lot of politics. And I want to just share real briefly what happened to cause me to have some personal politics. And this is important even for the younger folks in the room, where, like I said, I moved up there to climb. I didn't have any kind of fixed job. So I was looking for, okay, how can I pay my bills while I spend my summers climbing in the Alaska range? And so I was looking through the newspaper, and I saw this ad in the classified section, excuse me, and it said, quadriplegic man needs personal assistant, must be willing to travel. And I thought, well, I like to travel, so that sounds fun. So I go and meet this fella, and his name's Duane, and he had broken his neck in a diving accident when he was 14 years old, and he'd been quadriplegic ever since then. And so he had a wheelchair. It was an electric wheelchair. He just had partial use of his arms. And so he was a state division director, but he needed someone to help him get up and get in his chair and drive him into work and such. So I basically took a job being his arms and legs. And I was working that job. We became fast friends immediately. And he was a very, very political person, hardcore Democrat. And he said, so what are your politics? And I was raised down in Houston, Texas by conservative Republican parents and didn't really understand politics and didn't really overtly have any. But I told Duane, I said, well, I guess I'm a Republican. And he kind of turned a shade of red. And he said, okay, well, what are the Republican policies that you support? Or what are the Democrat policies that you oppose? Why aren't you a libertarian or a green or an anarchist? And I kind of had drool running down the side of my mouth. I had no answers. I was completely ignorant. So I got kind of puffed my chest out a little bit, and I said, well, whatever they do doesn't really affect us anyway. And he said, you really think so? And I said, yeah, I do. And I really did, shockingly. And he said, okay, think about this. So right now, the Alaska State Legislature is trying to pass a bill, and if it goes through, I'm going to lose the funding I get to have a weekend personal care attendant, which means he wouldn't be able to get in his wheelchair over the weekend or do anything. He'd just be stuck in bed. So he said, so think about this. So if that goes through, I'm going to not have any funding to have a weekend personal assistant. So what I want you to do is you're going to go home this Friday, and Friday night you're going to get in bed, and I want you to stay in bed until Monday morning. Sometime around the middle of the day, Saturday, you're going to be laying in your own urine and feces. And then sometime by Saturday night, you're going to run out of water to drink. And then you're going to stay that way until Monday morning, at which point I want you to call me and tell me that what they do doesn't affect us. And so I just said, okay, I'm listening. And for me, that started my political education. It's like, because someone that I really loved and cared about, I could directly see that what happens in the government is going to directly impact this person. And if that's going to happen to that person, it's going to happen to all of us. And so I got the memo, and I started reading, and I started becoming politicized. So by the time the Iraq War broke out, I understood that, for me, the importance of information and the truth in the media, that if people don't have accurate factual information, they're going to support really bad people doing really bad things. And that's essentially how it played out. So for me, I realized I wanted to go over to Iraq and start reporting on how the invasion and occupation was affecting the Iraqi people. So that's what I started to do. And that was in 2003, and now it's 16 years later, and I'm still doing it, except now I'm doing it with human-caused climate disruption. So that's how I became a journalist. And point being is, if I could do that in journalism, I was basically a mountain guy up in Alaska. And now that's my 4th book, and here I am talking to you in a workshop, and I'm going around giving book talks and such. So if I can do it, anybody can do it, right? So it all comes down to getting clear, what is it that you really care about? What do you feel really, really strongly about? What can you contribute to that? And then going and doing it, come hell or high water, basically. So I'm going to, I think, leave it at that, other than to say one other thing, one quote that two quotes I want to share with you, and then we're going to go into some breakout groups so that you young folks have some direct work to do. One is, there's a great quote from an intrepid journalist back in the day named Martha Gellhorn, and the quote is that all governments are bad and some are worse. So I think that's an important thing to know, especially as young folks, that governments, as they have developed in today's modern world, are clearly, by and large, not here to really serve us, which is what they're supposed to be doing. So we have to take that upon ourselves in our communities to do. The second thing is, this is a quote that's often been misattributed to George Orwell, but the quote is, "In a time of universal deceit, telling the truth becomes a revolutionary act." And I think it's safe to say in this country right now, it's a time of universal deceit. So anyway, to double underscore truth telling during this time, whatever you end up going and doing. So we have, we're gonna quickly break out into different groups. Everyone's gonna be in a different group, and I think there's people here amongst us who have determined which persons are going into which groups. So we have a future generations group, an oceans and water quality group, a food group, a biotech group, and a refugees group. And so folks are going to get into these smaller breakout groups for 10 minutes, and y'all are going to come up with what you feel are the most important point, or the most important point on the group that you're going to figure out what that is together in these different groups.
We talked about how sort of what we can do, what has happened, and then what we can do now, and then the lasting effect of what's going to happen in the future. So, stuff like there was something about we're putting what was it, paddles in the clouds, yeah. And so when you put something in the clouds, it would make it like there was like a movie about like how you can put something it was really hot, and so they put something in the clouds to make it snow, and then that sort of just made the whole world freeze over. So before, hot, and then like now they use this technology that they have, and they make it snow. Okay, solution, and then 30, 20 years later, you have a frozen planet which no one can survive on.
I want to start with the big picture. We wouldn't be on this planet today if we did not have a blanket of greenhouse gases. Our planet would be frigid and uninhabitable. So I want to start by talking about fixing cycles rather than saying carbon dioxide is evil. We have a broken water cycle, we have a broken carbon cycle, we have a lot of broken cycles. And so the story is that, in my mind, that biology created our atmosphere. If we did not have microbial life and green plants, we would not have oxygen. We would be overwhelmed with heat from carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Farming and forestry, that is cutting down forests, plowing, overgrazing, chemicals, has and continues to degrade the soil. And by degrading the soil, we're getting rid of the carbon that belongs in the soil as organic matter. And where did that carbon go? It went into the atmosphere. So we've got to bring that back, and that can be done by planting trees, but also by regenerative agriculture, which, unlike sustainable agriculture, aims to regenerate the soil. And this is a growing movement. It hasn't yet come very much to the Northeast, but in the Great Plains and the Midwest, there's a lot of farmers practicing it and innovating in this way. So we're really talking about biology, not biotech, not high-tech solutions, but biology as a lot of the solution for climate. Agriculture contributes a lot to climate change, and the effects are seen in farmers having a harder time producing any food because they have drought, they have too much heat, they have flooding, they have soil that doesn't hold nutrients. So this is kind of a new story, and I think it has far more importance than it's been getting attention. So by farming in nature's image, we can solve part of the climate problem. So visit regenerative agriculture farms and investigate the negative impacts of the loss of soil carbon on the environment, flooding, water quality problems, drought, high temperatures. Just think if you're on bare soil, it's going to be really hot. If you're on soil that's covered in plants, like you'll find in any natural setting, it's going to be cooler. One way to move people to action is to demonstrate. There's a lot of demonstrations that are being done where you show what happens to soil that's managed in different ways. Does it hold water, or does the water break up the soil and it all runs out to our rivers and oceans? And those are really kind of simple demonstrations, and they're very compelling.
So final words are, I think, what we can take from this experience is no matter what you decide to do, whether you are going to go into the media or the arts or become a farmer or whatever you decide to do, I think this model, we kind of just modeled what is a good way to start, which is decide, okay, what area really interests me, and then find some other people who are also interested in that and start talking with them and generate ideas, and then figure out what might I go do, what might I contribute to this, and then what's my plan of action, and how is that going to look? So that's essentially what was just done in all these groups that y'all took part in, and they were all really good presentations. All the important parts just kind of came out of that process. See, you went into it, everyone probably learns at least something that they didn't know before about that topic. Ideas were sparked and ideas came up, and they came up together, right? So this wasn't just like an individualistic thing, like you kind of thought together, and that's how this came up. And then each group decided, okay, this is this person's going to volunteer, this person's going to be our best spokesperson. So I think, again, it's that we're going to get there together concept. And I think that's going to become increasingly important as we go into the future, as things are changing. So really well done. I learned a lot too, and thanks everyone. Really, really great job. And thank all of you students for coming to this, and I hope you have some things to take home and think about from this.
I have a question. When we think about these challenging realities in the context of the US, it is very easy for us to see ourselves as the solution to world problems, right? And and I was kind of encouraged by one of the groups talking about our failure to see solutions in other places. That there are already cultures and traditions of regenerative lifestyles and community lifestyles that we do not embrace, we know very little about. We rarely speak about, for instance, Cuba after the end of the relationship with the Soviet Union, and the fact that they had to live through decades of what we have not yet lived in the US. And so many of those experiences represent tremendous examples for us. And so I'm wondering, if you can speak to this kind of educational, not failure, but kind of lack or absence in the US, because we're so centered on thinking that we have the ability to create solutions, and we do not see that there are already many solutions outside of our boundaries. And so I'm wondering if you can speak to that.
Yeah, really great point. Thank you. And I'm really, really critical of this American-centric house on the hill mentality that the dominant culture in this country perpetuates, that this is the only way, America's the greatest and the leader of the free world and all this nonsense, which has always been this false myth, this false meme that's never actually been true. Because what kind of leader? Does it have the biggest, most powerful military on the planet and the most nuclear weapons on the planet? Yes. Is it the biggest polluter on the planet? Yes. Is it an empire that's killed more people than any other empire on the planet? Probably. Is it the empire that's created this economic system that has spread around the world now that's literally, on the brink of killing life on Earth? Yes. So in what ways is America the greatest? And in reality, by the creation of this country, which is a country founded on genocide and slavery, it's annihilated groups of people that were here for thousands of years, Native Americans who were living already very closely, sustainably with the earth, having their cultural and spiritual traditions tied in with how they literally lived on the planet, treating it as the sacred entity that it already is, that this is where we came from and this is what sustains us and our lives depend on this planet, so why are we not behaving accordingly? So why are we not going back and listening to these people? As an example, Cuba's another, you mentioned there's numerous other examples we can point to around the world. And I think all we have to do is step out of this kind of idea of American exceptionalism and, which means, of course, understanding that in so many of our public schools, we're not even taught the appropriate history. We're not even taught the real meaning of the holiday of Thanksgiving. Let's talk about really what happened there. It's just, first it involves like re-educating ourselves if we were raised in that culture, and then having the ability to kind of step out of this and be like, oh no, this is just one way of thinking, and there's actually tens of thousands of other ways of thinking and looking at the world. So, one or two more.
Mainstream media, including NPR, seems to all sing the same song. I mean, yes, you can watch Democracy Now! And everything else, but most people who turn on their news, either Fox News, see it, all of them, you hear the same thing. Right now, Julian Assange is everyone hates him. Why? Because he told the truth. So, journalists are under attack on multiple levels. Mainstream media is owned by a small group of people. Even the local news is owned by, like, Sinclair. What's that solution? What do how do you get a message out, like the important messages that you've, so wonderfully explained, so that you get people to understand what the truth is and then respond?
No, I thank you for that, and this might be a great question to end on. One of the things that I wanted to point out that I forgot to, that you just reminded me of, Reporters Without Borders just came out with their annual report last week. And in that annual report, the United States is now in the top 5 countries as the most dangerous countries on the planet to work as a journalist. In our great, shining democracy, house on the hill, We're tied with India for 5th place as the most dangerous country to work as a journalist. 6 journalists last year alone were killed in cold blood for doing their job in this country. And we're not even going to talk, Julian Assange is another great example of here's what happens when you actually report important information in this country that the government doesn't want out. Here's what's going to happen to you. And so where else do we see this? Look what happens in Russia. They get poisoned, they get thrown in jail, other countries. So this is a very dangerous time in this country, and it's getting more dangerous, and it's going to get a whole lot more dangerous, I think, in the next 1/2 years, ... So that's why I got into journalism, my outrage at the corporate press. The corporate media during the lead up to the war in Iraq, there was one guy in Iraq. There weren't 23 million Iraqis. There was one guy. You turn on CNN, there's his face, Saddam Hussein, with the crosshairs on his face. That was the reporting during the lead up to the war. The New York Times, Judith Miller, quoting Dick Cheney as the anonymous government source over and over ad nauseum, that being used to justify an invasion that's now killed at least 1 million Iraqis, displaced at least 5 million, and look at Iraq today. So that's the consequence of not having good, honest, fact-based, truthful reporting. And the corporate media is a lost cause in this country. I'm not going to get my information out on NPR or CNN or anything like that. So what we're left with is a place like this, which this is a really, really special place, the Sanctuary for Independent Media. And I've talked to a couple of people earlier. I don't know anywhere else around the country where a place like this exists, where you've got, the ability to broadcast, you have workshops, you have trainings, you have events, you're bringing in speakers. This is an extremely amazing, unique place, and it's really inspiring for me to come here and see the kind of work that's being carried out here, and especially bringing in the young people, because if we don't have accurate information, we can't make good decisions. And so when we talk about a lot of this really hard information, especially about the climate crisis and other things that are happening, I often, I'm sometimes referred to as like the wrecking ball or the doomsday sayer. And my nickname at Al Jazeera English by my colleagues when I was reporting on these climate crisis stories was Darmageddon. And unfortunately, the stories I've reported have come out to be true. I don't want them to be true, but that's the truth. And so the way that I look at the media and this really, really hard information, where we talk about politics or the climate crisis or what have you, is if you're going out into the backcountry on, say, a backpacking trip, you're going to get a topographical map and plan your route. Okay, we're going to go here, we're going to camp here, there's a mountain here, a river, etc. Do you not want the most accurate current topographic map to plan your trip? So information in the media, it's an informational topographic map. And as hard as that topography might then be when you look at it, at least then you can make better decisions in your life about what to do, about what do I want to do, where are the needs, how can I be used to make this planet a little bit better place. So that's the importance of having a real, honest, free press, which we do not have on a national level in this country, so we have to create it here in places like the Sanctuary for Independent Media, and this is where you can do that work. And I can tell you that if you do that, even working on smaller outlets or Democracy Now!, for example, it will have an impact and it will change things. And that is a very important thing to keep doing, and that's why I've kept doing it, and that's why this place has grown and expanded and become even more impactful since last time I was here more than 10 years ago. So why don't we end, I think, on that note?
We're going to have one more question
Oh, okay.
from the youth.
Absolutely.
Okay. Why do you think that people don't listen to, climate change? And, I know a lot of people say that it's not happening. Why do you think they will deny blatant evidence?
Very good question. Thank you. Well, the intellectual answer to that on a national level is that in this country, the facts are, and this is extremely well documented, that fossil fuel companies, the big oil industry, has funded these fake scientists to refute the findings of the vast majority of science, which is the basic physics are, everyone knows, you already know from your education, that carbon dioxide, CO2 is a heat-trapping gas. So if you put more of that into a space, it's going to trap more heat and things are going to warm up. This is basic physics. And yet, how do you get a population of adults who theoretically are educated and can think for themselves to believe that that can't happen? Well, you get the fossil fuel industry funds pundits, they fund media outlets to basically try to say that that's not happening and that's not true. Don't believe this evidence right in front of your eyes, like these extreme weather events, changing weather patterns, changing climate patterns, and things that are happening globally. So that's the intellectual part of my answer. The other answer is that the climate crisis is terrifying. And each one of us knows inside, on some level, even those that are in denial, that it's happening. They're in denial for a reason, right? Denial implies that you know something somewhere back in here, but then you're going to actively deny it. So there's a person named Elizabeth Kubler-Ross several decades ago that came out with something called the 5 stages of grief. And it's when someone's dying, they and people around them go through these 5 stages. And one of the first stages is denial. Oh, it's not happening, or it's not going to be that bad, or it's going to be okay. And when I look at these people now in these groups, they're stuck in the denial phase. And then you get into the later phases, and it's things like depression, there's anger, depression, and then ultimately acceptance. But the denial, they're just people stuck in the denial phase because the enormity of the crisis is really, really scary. And so I look at those people, and on my better days, I have compassion for them, and they just don't want to know. But more and more of them are getting it. And the facts are, statistically, even now the majority of Republicans accept that the climate crisis is real. And certainly the vast majority of the people, even in this country, believe that it's real. And of course, across the rest of the world, the thing, to end on at least a little bit of a positive note on that question, I was working for Al Jazeera English over in Doha, Qatar, and we had a very, very international audience of about 1/3 of a billion people. And I never had to worry about denial. Like, I never had to worry about any part of my audience not accepting the fact that the climate crisis was real. It was only when I came back to this country that I had to adjust my reporting to understand that there's going to be some people reading this that may not believe it, right? So that's my point, is that the vast majority of the rest of the world understands what's happening and gets it, and it's a crisis, and are trying to respond accordingly. But that's a really good question. Thank you for asking it. And thanks all of you was there one more question there?
I know people don't listen to children as much, but do you have any ideas to get people to listen to me about climate change?
I think, I don't know if I do. I would like to have a conversation with you about that. But I know that for me, in my work now, I think the most important work that any of the older generations can do, and that we're morally obliged to do, is to work with, help, and support younger generations in every way possible that we have. So the fact that there's young kids walking out of school to protest the climate crisis, to try to force adults to pay attention and listen and do the right thing, this is a seminal thing happening at this moment in history. And I feel deeply, deeply obliged to work with and support you guys as much as I can, you folks as much as I can on this issue. So I think, a lot of adults, I don't know, a lot of people would disregard younger folks just because, you're not an adult or you're too young or whatever. But I think any adult that's not listening to the feelings that, hey, you're concerned about this and you want us to do something about it. And how any adult could think that's not legitimate, I think they're just being callous and really irresponsible as an adult for what their obligations are as an adult to take care of future generations and do everything we can to help you. That's our role, that's our responsibility. And if someone's not doing that, then they're not behaving like a responsible adult. That's the way I see it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you guys.